Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Sheila Ronning. I'm the CEO and founder of Women in the Boardroom. And if you are not familiar with who we are the experts to help you land your first, second, or third corporate board seat. We can help you get onto a small private board or a Fortune 50 and everything in between. Our proven process gives you a much better ROI on your time and your energy. And we do this by ensuring that you are positioned and branded for board work, along with providing you with a strategy to network and expand your connections. Additional membership benefits include providing you with a community of like-minded individuals, boardroom education, and of course, like today's webinar, we have a fantastic session on, what your first year as a board member is like and what to expect. We have an amazing group of individuals to share their experiences and opinions with you. And I know it's going to be a lively discussion. We have Howard Brownstein, who will be moderating our speakers, and he is the president of Brownstein Corporation, which is a turnaround and crisis management company. And he has over 40 years experience as an independent corporate board member for public and private companies, as well as large nonprofit boards. So Howard, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you guys do your introductions, because I'm so excited for Deb and Megan. Love them all. Welcome.
Thank you, Sheila, and hello, everyone. Welcome to Women in the Boardroom and our program on your first year as a board member and what to expect. We'll get started with our slides. And as Sheila said, I am president of the Brownstein Corporation. We are a turnaround management firm, although lately we've been mostly doing M&A work for healthy companies because there hasn't been much distress. That may, of course, change. I also regularly serve as an independent corporate board member of public companies, private companies, and large nonprofits. Let me now introduce our panelists. We have a terrific panel for you today. First, Ann Del Santo, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks, Howard. It's great to be here. And, it reminds me when I joined Women in the Boardroom, I was in my role as an EVP and platform GM at Salesforce. And I was starting to think about what might it look like for the next chapter and what might it look like to be doing board work. And of course, Women in the Boardroom was amazing in that journey. I'm currently serve on the boards of 3 public companies and 2 private companies. Recently stepped off of a private company as it was acquired by Salesforce. So that was an interesting crossover. I'm also a limited partner in 2 venture funds. And, appropriate to today's conversation, I did attend the Stanford University Board College, and so I welcome any questions about that, and just think that was a great onboarding experience. And so, again, lovely to be here. Great to be with such an impressive panel, and with that, I'll turn it over to Deb.
Thank you. Deb, please tell us a little about yourself.
Thanks, Ann. Hi, Deb Elam. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Really excited to be here. This program with Women in the Boardroom has been a tremendous asset and help for me, and I think it will be for you as well. I am president and CEO of a consulting business called Corporate Playbook. We do a few things: leadership development, executive coaching, diversity, inclusion, equity, strategic consulting, so very much at the senior levels of organizations. I am an independent director on 2 boards right now that I'll speak to: DJE Holdings, which is Edelman, the largest PR firm in the world, and ShotSpotter, which is public. I was on a board called Lucid, which was VC backed, and it sold, similar to Ann's situation, it sold at the end of the year last year, and so I'm no longer on that board. I had a 30-year career at GE as a corporate officer, held a variety of roles. Last role was president and CEO of the foundation. And I hail from New Orleans. I'm excited to get into our conversation today.
Thank you, Deb. And last but certainly not least, Megan, please tell us about yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I am Megan Juday. I'm the chairman and family shareholder of Ideal Industries. Ideal is a 106-year-old family-owned business, and I've been in that board chair role for 2 years. We're going to talk a little bit more about kind of onboarding from a chairman's perspective. Also, I'm on the Bright Star Capital board, as well as the Kingsbury board, and then I serve on several advisory and nonprofit boards as well. I did form as kind of out of necessity a peer group for female board chairs, just because it's pretty lonely, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about today. But it's really lonely being in a leadership room in the boardroom, and it can be you can end up with quite a few challenges. So that's something that, that's something that a perspective that I'm happy to share. And then I have done, in addition to a lot of the speaking and writing that I do around family business and corporate governance, I've done a lot of executive education at Wharton, which is right near where I live. So with that, I guess we'll turn it over to the program.
Thank you, Megan. So here's what we're going to talk about today. Of course, your first year is very important, and we're going to talk about that and why it's important. We're going to talk about the onboarding process and what it consists of. We'll talk about the transition from your role as an executive to serving on boards. We'll talk about what it's like if you may happen to be the first and/or the only woman on the board or person of color, et cetera. And we invite your questions at any time, and we'll also leave time for the end. And I want to remind our panelists that, particularly for today's program, we really want you to add as many instances and stories from your own experience as you can, because we don't have that many slides. And so we're really looking for your comment and to share what you've learned. So let's get started. You know, getting on a board is like getting on a train, and I'll bet everybody on the call has gotten on a train at some point or another. I'm also willing to bet that the train stopped when you got on it. This train is not stopping. You are getting onto a moving train. Everyone on the train may have been on there for a while, the other board members, but from the moment you're on it, you are as responsible as they are for everything. And therefore, it's very important that you find a way to get up to speed as quickly as possible. And that process is called onboarding. So it's very important that you think about this in advance if possible. Optimally, you'll have some runway before you get on the board, and you'll be able to be ready day one. But if that's not the case and you're getting a call to join a board tomorrow and you decide to do it, then you'll have to get up to speed as quickly as you can. We believe that a really good onboarding process is a key element of good governance and is really the responsibility of the board at large, which should have created a process well in advance of a new board member's arrival, and then updated it periodically and evaluated its effectiveness. I have not encountered many boards that have that. So that's a bit aspirational. Some do. All of them should. So if the board you're joining doesn't have such a process, it's up to you to create it for yourself and then join with the other board members to help make it work, and management, and then figure out, okay, if they didn't have that, what else don't they have? Because they should have had it, and put it in place for the next board member who joins. So Megan, tell us more about onboarding, please.
So I think just, one of the things to keep in mind is if you are on a board and on the nominating governance committee, I think one of the things to remember is that onboarding doesn't just happen your first year. It's one of those things that actually, because those your directors are basically only talk about the business, come in and talk about the business 4 times a year. I think onboarding really is kind of a continual process. Obviously, you're going to spend quite a bit more time on it the first year, but I think it's one of those things that probably needs to continue to happen throughout your service on the board. So I think that and so one of the things that we do in our boardroom is we actually have the onboarding resource library that we created for our directors, and we actually update it every quarter with new org charts, new information, and make that available to all of our directors so that they continue to stay up to speed. And I think one of the things that is really important is to not only understand the business, but understand the people that you're going to be spending time with. And I know we're talking later about what if you're the only woman in the room, or what if you're the only person of color in the room? And I think one of the things that you have to ask before you take the job is, are they ready for you? Are they going to welcome your voice? Or do you have allies? Do you have people who are going to make space for you in the conversation? And I think that's one of the challenges that it's really hard to be an effective director if there's no room for you to speak. And in fact, when I onboarded 2 women, the first 2 women in our 105-year history. One of them was very seasoned, been on many boards. She was CFO, super confident, and had just jumped right in. And then second woman was a CMO. We're really focused on digital in our business, and so we brought her in for her digital expertise and e-commerce. And 6 months into the job, she told me, "Oh, by the way, I haven't been able to get a word in edgewise." So that's on me as chairman. And in fact, I wish you would have said it after the first meeting, because I would have been able to take action faster. And that is one of the things that's really critical when you're in the boardroom, is that you need to advocate for yourself. If you cannot get a word in edgewise, that is your responsibility to talk to the chairman or lead director about. And a lot of things changed as a result of her comment, including my facilitation, the board packets, the agenda. I mean, we did a massive body of work over the last couple of years to make sure that there was space for every voice in the room. But I think that's like one of the important, contributions that new directors can make, is they make us examine, who we are as the existing board, and making sure that, as you're contemplating onboarding, making sure that there is space for you at the table and in the conversation.
That's great. Thank you. Deb, would you like to add any comments?
The only thing I'd add on this particular slide, and I agree with what Megan said, is, as much diligence as you can do. Think about if you've ever been involved in acquisition or deals, do your diligence. If you can visit the company's headquarters, what can you do there to kind of look around and see? And for me, it's use all of those skills, bring all of them to bear. If you get a chance to visit, what do you see? What does it feel like? What pictures are on the wall? Just take in everything, because that's going to tell you a lot about the culture and who you're dealing with. But no, I think Megan nailed it.
Thank you. Anne, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, again, I agree with what's been said. These ladies are definitely pointing to what's important. I would say to add to them, I spent a lot of my career, 30 years, in go-to-market and in the technology. So things that were very interesting to me as I was as an executive was I always wanted to hear about the competition. Who are our competitors? What's the market share? And those are pieces of information that I'm very interested in, to really get a picture of who are we as a company and where are we going, because it really fits into our strategy, our risk, succession planning. These are things that the board has to care about. also as a member of a board, they have brought me on for my skill. And so that, I want to lean on that, and I want to really double click on that so that my voice is showing up on the things that I did that made me successful in my career. So don't ever forget that part of it as well.
Great, thank you. So I'll just add that, as the slide says, the onboarding process for any two directors may be different based on their experience, their knowledge. One of them may have a lot of experience with the industry and the other may not. So their learning process is obviously going to be different. Listed here are some items that might go on a checklist. And as I said, where appropriate, some may be more appropriate for some board members than others. Things like learning about the industry, learning about what's written about the industry, what's been written about the company. How about social media? Are there any legal or regulatory problems going on? Visit the company's headquarters and maybe some of the places where it does business. Meet with management, certainly meet the other board members. Whatever blindingly brilliant ideas may come to you on these visits, keep them to yourself and bring them back to the board. It's not appropriate for you to talk to management, even if you have a letter from God in your pocket telling you how they should do something differently. It's not appropriate. Bring it back to the board, talk to the chair, talk to the CEO, figure out how best to make the point. Deb, talk to us some more about onboarding and how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things you can do. And certainly in my experience, assemble reports. What's been written? What are the financials? What's the 10K? If it's public or private, what's in their annual report? I mean, whatever you can get your hands on. And in the age of social media, look at their social media. What do they put out on LinkedIn? What do they put out on all the various platforms? Because that's going to tell you a lot about who you're dealing with. And I would say even before you're actually on the board, because I think onboarding starts before you're actually on the board. Onboarding should start when you're really in a serious conversation about joining the board, because that's going to determine if it's a good fit for them and for you, right? Because it's a two-way street. So look at that. Who's on the board, right? Who will you be colleagues with? Look them up, see what they're involved in. What other boards are they on? You'd be amazed as you start to build a matrix, if you will. These 8 people are on the board with me. Well, each one of them may be on 2 other boards. You'll see who you know. Ask questions. Is it a sharp elbow kind of place, or is it more collegial and collaborative? And that really matters. And you can find that stuff out pretty easily. Do they use governance best practices? Do they have committees? If not, how do those committees function? What committees do they have? When do they meet? Is it all in person? Now, this has all been a big mishmash, right, since COVID. The boards that I'm on right now, obviously everything was Zoom. Now it's kind of hybrid, where they're both cases, they're both very global. So they are providing Zoom, but really want you to come in. And I would encourage you to make every effort to be in person if you can, and it's safe and you're comfortable, because that's where the bonding happens. That's where you really get to have the drink at the bar right after dinner, and you get to know somebody. And I think that's really critical.
Thank you. Megan, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think, Deb, you really hit on something that I think is critical, and that's, if onboarding takes a year or, several years, as I posit, really it's, building strong boards have a high level of trust. And in order to really build that trust, and there has to be some vulnerability there, right? I mean, there has to be vulnerability amongst the directors, but there also has to be trust between the board and the management team. And that can be quite challenging, especially if people feel like the board is judging them, rather than providing, helpful feedback. So I think that, taking the time to come in early, have lunch or breakfast with people, dinner the night before. I totally agree, Deb, that make that your board meeting or the board activities are not just what's happening in the room, right?
That's
and
right.
you want to actually spend time building relationships with the other directors, as well as as appropriate with the management team.
Thank you. Anne, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, what I'd like to double click on is this, your run up to actually being invited to join the board is a key part of your onboarding. So all the work that you did there. And, at the time, I really thought a lot about how is this different than interviewing for, an executive job. And, and it is the other board members because you're in a longer term relationship with this group of people. And so, in the interviewing process, really taking the time to get to know these other members, looking and asking for the skills matrix so that am I bringing a unique voice to this table that's needed for this company? I think those are some of the things that are really important. Certainly for public boards, listening to the earnings calls, the last 3 earnings calls, this is something you could, of course, do before you're on the board, but it really gives you a sense of the dynamic of the relationship that's happening between the CEO, CFO, the shareholders, the analysts. Those are some of those really key onboarding activities that I did that really helped prepare me. And again, when you're looking at that boardroom, you're making a decision that I am going to be with these people for probably when the company hits some of the toughest things that it's going to hit, because that's when a board really is working. So, you join a board in 2019 and some little thing hits in 2020, and all of a sudden you're working really closely and meeting more often with everybody on the board. And those are things that are not in your control, but they're in your control while you're interviewing and while you're onboarding to really prepare for those scenarios when you're going to be working together through potentially crisis that can hit.
Thank you, Anne. So there's mention on the slide about a skills matrix, and we've all heard about that, but it really is a best practice for thinking, okay, if we didn't have a board for this company, what would be the ideal collection of skills and experience? Which ones do we not have enough of? How do we add those? And think about other best practices for boards. Are the materials sent out with plenty of advance notice? Are the dates for meetings scheduled well in advance? Is there enough time provided in the meeting for adequate discussion? Is the information you're given adequate? What about the board culture? Is, respectful disagreement welcomed, and healthy skepticism also welcomed? So those are just a few. And staying with onboarding, talk to us about some of the things on this slide, what you've experienced.
Yeah, I think here again, it's pointing to some of the best practices. These are things that that you're joining this webinar or listening to this, you're going to get some best practices so that when you're in that role, you know what to ask for. So things to think about. Ask, do you do a board survey, an annual board survey? Howard just said a skills matrix is a best practice. So is an annual board survey. So does the board do that? And can you get a copy of the last one that was just in the previous year? Look at the calendars. Look at the committees. Again, on public boards, they have board portals. And you really want to get access to at least the last fiscal year of committee meetings, of the strategy, of the people discussions, of the risk assessments. So you really want to take the time to look into the work and the conversations that have happened in the previous board meetings. Some of the best practices that I have seen, and of course now I've had the opportunity to work with Nom and Gov chairs and also to be a Nom and Gov chair on one of my boards, is I start to think about what were the rooms, what was the area of improvement that I would have appreciated as an onboarded, a new board member, and how can I build that into the onboarding practice? And this, I feel, again, as an operating executive, onboarding was very important to me. How do you attract and retain top talent? How do you think about an evergreen for your board process? And so the things that you are experienced, put that into action. Meet with the Nom and Gov chair. suggest, hey, did you ever think about a board buddy? Did you ever think that maybe we should have assignments or rotating assignments with the management team? And so I'm always quick, again, from my background as a go-to-market executive, I'm always asking the CEO and the chairman of the boards that I serve, would you like me to mentor or meet with the chief revenue officer? If they are looking for new management, would you like me to be one of the finalists in your interview process? These are things that as I'm onboarding, I'm also bringing a lot of the experience from my executive experience and bringing that to the board. So I would say the experience that I have had is there has been an onboarding process, certainly in the public companies, but somewhat in the private companies. But I think all of them, like in everything we do, have room for improvement. And that is one of the best places that you could begin, especially if that's something that you're comfortable with and have a real passion for, how to make the onboarding process great. The only final thing I'll add to that, being in a NomGov chair position, another great practice is to bake in what does board education, what should it look like? Where should we incorporate it? How do you get feedback from the other board members on topics that are really important to the board? So for all of us to stay up to date, being on a board, as you've all experienced in your entire career, it is a lifelong learning journey. And so onboarding is not, the other panelists have said it, Deb and Megan have said it, it's not just the first year. This is a mindset ongoing.
Thank you. Deb, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just one small thing. I think, and I'm on the NomGov committee on one of my boards as well. Interesting, and we just had to bring 2 new directors on since I've been on this board. So we've had a very active committee from that standpoint. I would say ensure, well, let me back up. Most people that I know, I don't care what kind of leader there are, most people in the world are not good interviewers. They really are not. They go with some sort of, oh, well, so-and-so is in this kind of job, they must be a good fit. And that may not be the case. So what I have found, and my background, as you said, and play to your strength, my background is HR. I'm sort of trying to illuminate in those conversations skill set, competence, experience. And in doing that, what I have found is it widens the tent. It actually opens the door for more women, for more people of color, for more non-traditional board players, because what you're illuminating is things historically we wouldn't necessarily hone in on. So I think it's really, really important, particularly as you think about NomGov in onboarding and that whole process, that you showcase as much of candidates and what they can bring. Somebody told me a long time ago, being on a board is like getting credit, right? It's hard to get, but once you get credit, everybody wants to give you credit. So it's that first one, just because they've not been on one, which is the whole premise of Women on Boards, right? Let's just talk about what can they add. Let's get over that barrier of, well, they're not on one now, they've never been on one, which is what we tend to fall back on. I think the onus is on us as women on boards to illuminate in a way such that it's going to be a good conversation to have with other directors to say, wow, I didn't realize she brought this to the table or she had that experience.
Thank you. Megan, anything you would like to add?
Well, yes, and I think, Deb, what you just said is so fascinating, and it's really hard to to break through to getting one woman on the board, because people nobody's trying, and I know there's more conversation about it now, but I don't think it's really a proactive effort. But I agree with your premise that kind of women beget women in the room, right? And in fact, the way that I really look at the board is that you want your board to be the leading edge of your organization. You want the composition, the skill sets to be where you want your company to be in 5-10 years from now, because your board actually can pull the management team and the rest of the organization to where the strategy is. So I definitely agree, and I think that there's a lot, especially if somebody's in the nominating governance committee, there's a lot you can do, certainly in the private space, to just interview women. It's very easy to find highly qualified people if you're just really looking at that segment of the population you're trying to attract. The other thing I would just mention, based on something that Anne said, is I like the question, is there, really exploring their governance process and asking whether or not there is a board survey is excellent. And the other thing I would ask and tack onto that question is, what do you do with the feedback? If you're asking the same questions and getting the same answers every year, okay, maybe that's not as effective as it could be. So one of the things that we do in our board is we basically gather all the feedback and track it we evaluate the committees, the board, and the CEO, and everybody basically has their action item list. And sometimes you can't take all the feedback all at once and implement it in a year. But one of the things that we do before we do send out the next survey is I send out the action item list and said, here's all the things that we worked on based on your feedback. So that really is trying to get even the board itself into that evolutionary process that I want all of our directors to be on as well. And that's it's just a great tool, and it's something that once you're in the room to really try to encourage as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's it for now.
So I'll just add regarding the first bullet point here about the process. It's very important to have as part of your board culture that your minutes reflect what the board did. If the board is going to the trouble taking their time to do something, take credit for it, get it in the minutes. From the point of view of legal liability for breach of fiduciary duties, what the courts look at is the process. If the board followed a sound process and there have been no breaches of the duty of loyalty, then in most cases, the business judgment rule is going to protect you, even if the outcome was unfavorable, because you followed a sound process. But if you don't have minutes that reflect that, you have a harder job to prove you did. So it's good discipline, and onboarding is one thing that you should make sure the minutes reflect you did. So let's keep going. And we've been talking a lot about onboarding, but it's only part of your first year as a board member. So Megan, talk to us about the learning process overall.
So we have touched on this a little bit, but I do think that it's important to really consider, being a director as an act of service. And in order for people to be of service, they have to continue to move the needle on their, skills and education and expertise. The board and the business do not stay static. So, once you're in, you're good, So I think it's really critical that you think of your activities as service, and there are tons of education that's very easy to do on the outside. If you're private company, there's this organization. If you're serving on a private company board, there's Private Directors Association, NACD, the list goes on and on and on. And so I really would encourage everybody who is a director just to take their board activities as part of their service to this organization, and it makes you better, and it makes you more confident, and makes you believe that you're bringing the highest value to the organization that you can. Secondly, I think it's really important to ask for feedback as you go along, and be open to feedback when you get it. So asking your board chair, your committee chairs, where, what you can be doing better, where you could be bringing more value. People are saying you should be speaking up more, or I really wish you would contribute more, or XYZ. If you're feeling like there are barriers to you doing that, you need to share that back. And it kind of becomes like a mutual feedback conversation. So, for example, when I had one of my directors say, I can't get a word in edgewise, that's feedback from me that I took very seriously. and did a very significant body of work to make sure that everybody in this space felt like they had an equal opportunity to contribute, and it changed my facilitation styles. It made me intervene more when people are kind of going on for too long. And so I think there's a lot of work that can be done. I think the other thing to consider is that you really want to take the time to make sure that the environment in which you are in is inclusive. So if you're not feeling like, as I mentioned, if you can't get a word in edgewise, or people kind of talk over you or whatever, that you're bringing that to people's attention so that there can be more proactive actions taken. Yeah, and I would say if you don't feel like you're bringing value, if you're in the wrong committee, you don't feel like bringing value to the committees that you're involved in, absolutely speak up. Or if you feel like you have expertise that you can bring to a committee and maybe it's been overlooked, I would say, bring that up as well. A lot of boards will refresh their committee assignments every few years, so I think there's opportunities. And if you would like to be a committee chair, I think it's very important that you bring that to the board chairs and the board chair's attention. So if you feel like you have time and expertise, oftentimes there's additional compensation for being a board chair, but there's a lot more responsibility. So use caution when you volunteer. So I would say, I would say that it's important also, I think, and this is Ann and Deb kind of spoke to this earlier, is really work hard to make the board the best it can be. So if you feel like there's things we're missing, there's governance opportunities we could take advantage of that we're not, hey, we should try having more time for conversation in the dialogue, or let's adjust the agenda, or let's adjust the board packet. All of those things, any suggestion you have, I can speak as board chair, I'm really excited. Sometimes they're really hard for me to implement, but I want to know. These boards are so expensive. They take so many resources. And if you have ideas on how we can be better or achieve governance excellence, I want to know. I would think other board chairs would as well.
Deb, any comments you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think Megan had really good insight. One of the things I'll add is a lot of what Megan talked about is the how to show up well, right? To show up well in the boardroom. So I want to just hit on the why. Why does it matter to show up in the boardroom? You want to be an effective director. You want to contribute. I think anybody who's at that level, that's what they're about. But look, the other very selfish reason is because of who else is in the room. Because how do you get to the second board could be dependent on people in the room with you and how you show up with them and whether or not they want to throw your name. I mean, I very specifically referred someone on a board that I'm in to their second board, or to another board, because how that person showed up. And so again, sometimes as women, we don't want to think in that very selfish way, but I think we should do more of that. It's okay to say, I want to show up well because these folks may be able to put my name in for something else.
Thank you. Ann, anything you'd like to add?
Just to add to, be open to feedback, but also be brutally honest with yourself after every single board meeting. Did you do the homework? Are there areas that you should drill down on? Like, just take a look at that. And I have found that NACD just has so many self-serve, very targeted. Maybe you're in a committee meeting and you didn't really get what does ISS and Glass Lewis do and why is it so important, what they're saying on our proxy or the way they're voting. There are some new terms that might hit, and just follow up. So be honest, take those notes as you're in board meetings on places where you don't feel that you can show up with your voice, and then take that back and say, you know what, this is an area I really want to learn more, because in the next board meeting, where you look ahead at the calendar, I really want to weigh in on some of these things. So, it's definitely good to get feedback. It's also incredibly important for the learning process that never ends, that you're always refreshing and honestly looking at that, how you show up.
Thank you. We do have a question posted, but I'm going to hold it to the end just to make sure we stay on time. So I will come back to it. I'll just add to what is said that one of my personal heroes was Mayor Ed Koch of New York, because he would walk around the city and whoever he'd run into, he'd say, "How am I doing?" And whatever the person would say to him that wasn't about perfection, he would have some staffer behind him taking notes so there would be follow-up. So have a "how am I doing" attitude. It's really helpful. So let's keep going. Anne, talk to us about transitioning to your first board role.
Yeah, I think on this part, there's two sides to this coin. One is walk in that room with confidence. You're there for a reason. You've been through a rigorous interview process. You've got the skills that fill out something on that skills matrix that this company and this board need. Don't forget that. Like, bring all of that with you, and that's the confidence to your voice. But remember, this isn't an operational executive role. This is a board role. So this is oversight. This is not management. And so, the key goals of a board is risk management, succession planning, and strategy. And, it is, you've heard the old saying, like, noses in and hands out. So it is oversight. It is not management. And you want to remind yourself about that throughout the process. And so bring that expertise to ask those board level questions. Every time a strategy is presented, or people's strategy is presented, product, where are we going, the long-term planning, the short-term planning, ask the tough questions. Look for the holes in anything that you're hearing, and ask those tough questions. So those are the open-ended questions, and you want to hear from management. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So that is really, be clear on what your role is and contribute. I am definitely somebody who loves to learn by sitting back and listening and getting a little bit of the context. But even as that, when you enter a boardroom, certainly if you're the only one that looks like that, and I'm sure if you're in this position, that's not the first time in your career that you've been the only one that looks like you in the room, it is important that you do contribute. And so, pick your battles, bring up the questions. You don't have to talk all the time. You don't want to force it all the time, but there are places you want to show up. And always go back and remember, for me, that skills matrix is a really important document, because it says, this is why the company and the board said I needed to be here. And that is sort of the impetus, especially in the beginning. Why am I here? Why does the company need me? What are the things I should be asking questions about and digging into? And then be proactive. I would say one of the things that sometimes you can forget, I'm sure if you've been in leadership, you can forget this, and you have to be reminded of it, that it's critically important to listen. And when you're listening, listen to the challenges the CEO is facing. And I found that this is, as an example, in one of my boards, I kept hearing the CEO say, I care so much about, diversity and ensuring that I'm attracting all different talent. And he said it often enough that, I walked up to him and I said, I want you to know this board has done a great job of reflecting that passion. If you ever want me to join you for a fireside chat, for an internal all hands call, or an all hands meeting. And this was particularly important during COVID, when, we were really evaluating our cultures. Is our culture being in person? How do you keep the culture when everybody's working from home? How do you show up in a way that says, this is our culture, and you have nothing else to depend upon except what you've actually scribed as your culture? And so those were some of those areas, like really have a keen listening ear for the places that are problems or something needs to be solved, and say, make an offer. And I think those have been really places on the board where I've not only been able to help advance some of the strategy of the company, but it's also solidified some of the important relationships, both with the chairman, with the CEO, other board members, key executives. And those are the things that you just want to remember. This is why we're doing it. I mean, it is enjoyable. You've had a great career. You've learned so many things. You're continuing to learn, and you have a great passion about bringing shareholder value and stakeholder value in the current role that you're in. So, so those are some of the things that I've used in my board roles, especially looking at it from that moment of transition.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Megan and Deb to hold your comments on that slide because I'm keeping my eye on the clock and I want to make sure we get done, but we'll circle back if we can. So there are obviously different types of boards in the sense of the underlying companies. There are public companies, private companies, nonprofits. It's important to know that corporations are creatures of state law. So there's a state law that creates every corporation or to which the corporation is subject. And those fiduciary duties are the same, regardless of what kind of company it is, in the sense public, private, nonprofit. So it's very important that you as a board member understand those rules as they apply in your state. Anne, would you cover the next bullet point, please?
Sure. I mean, I think the things about public companies that you just want to keep in mind that make them very different than private is obviously the governance that surrounds public companies. The compensation that you will receive, how are you able to handle that? What do you need to do? What's considered insider trading, and what do you have to be really quiet about and not share? There are things that only stay in the boardroom. What do you do with the notes that you're taking? Where are you taking your notes? All of this is discoverable. Also thinking about the potential for shareholder activism, which is on the rise. It's happening everywhere and all the time. And so again, we're talking about onboarding. What does that mean? And do you know what that means? And some of the things to look for, because that's one of your fiduciary responsibilities for risk management as well. So the good thing about public companies is some of the governance and the structure is very strong. The GCs in these companies are excellent and great people to certainly at least have an onboarding conversation with. So
thank you. Megan, please take the third point. Megan, you might be muted.
Sorry, that's a Zoom habit. So I would say, family businesses don't really have a great reputation. And I would just say that for those individuals who are looking at private board service, a lot of private companies and family-owned businesses do have solid, good governance. I can say certainly in our case and many of the other boards that I'm familiar with, they really operate as if they were public companies without some of the burdens of actually and some of these other challenges that public companies face. So if you are looking at service with a private company and family business in particular, one of the things to look at is the governance of the family itself, to make sure that the family is managing their own business to the extent that they can. Sometimes, given generational transitions and other challenges, sometimes those dynamics can seep into the boardroom. But you want to be assured that those families really do have a strong family governance to manage a lot of their own issues on their own. And lastly, just like in public companies, you can have activists in the boardroom, as they certainly they can at times have different opportunities to influence, given their various shareholding, given how many shares they have. But still, you can end up with a very disruptive family member in the boardroom if it comes to that.
Thank you. Deb, please take the last point.
Yeah, just quickly, in terms of private company boards that are either private equity, VC backed, and I was on one of those, think about the motivations of various board members because they may be more different than they are in other companies. From a private equity investor standpoint, they're looking for their cash and their return on equity. That's literally what they're looking for, as quickly as possible. And in this particular scenario, I'll share quickly, we were looking at a deal. The company has now sold, so I can share this. We were looking at a deal and the VC guys were like, yeah, but it'll be this ROI. They were running all kind of numbers. And given my background in HR, I said, hey, do we have the intellectual capacity and horsepower of people within the company right now to work on this as well as run the business? And if we don't, what is our plan to ensure that we have the people in the seats who can work on these different deal scenarios or not? And you could have heard a pin drop. So, lean into what your area of expertise is in all these scenarios, because it may be that nobody else is thinking about that. You're muted, Howard. Howard, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. For many people on the call, they may wind up being the first woman or person of color on the board. Deb, speak to us about that, please.
Yeah, no, and I mean, this has certainly been my case, not either or, but both. And, it's really important to find allies. Maybe it's the chair, maybe it's somebody in NomGov who has been the point person for you, but you'll be able to kind of figure that out. And I mean, I always look to see in that first meeting, who are the power players? And I mean, I hate to put it that bluntly, but it's that bluntly. Who does the board chair seem to really listen to? Who seems to really speak and people kind of pause? If you can align with that person and they're willing to be helpful to you, that would be extremely helpful. Make sure you're persistent around these things. How you show up there is going to matter. And then what I do, I have a specific technique that I use because people cannot refute your own experience. Always remember that, right? So if somebody says something, I may say, well, in my experience, blah, 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 because nobody can tell me what my experience was or wasn't, even if they disagree, or in my observation, blah, blah, blah. So that's just a really specific technique you can use to have your voice heard, to speak your truth in these scenarios. And then, peer groups, people have mentioned other organizations, certainly this group, and women have reached out to me after these sessions to say, hey, I'd like to stay connected with you. They've connected with me on LinkedIn. I'm a member of ELC, the Executive Leadership Council. We have a group that works on board stuff. There's a group called Black Women on Boards, of which I'm a member. So, whatever you can do, whatever works for you to feel comfortable. I know Ann said she had gone to the, I think Stanford, whatever program. I'm sure there are alums of that program you can connect with. Whatever's working for you, do that, because it does get lonely sometime and you want to be sure you've got somebody to bounce off of.
Thank you. Ann, please add any comments, but I would ask you to hold it to about half a minute.
Sure. The only thing I would add to what Deb greatly said is, sometimes in my experience, the private boards, I'm the only person, but not only the only woman, but I'm the only person, like Deb was talking about on those private companies, who's coming with a perspective of an operator and not just looking at what's the ROI and how can we make the most money. And so that makes it a unique voice. And that's where I can show up. And then it sort of lowers the barrier of I'm the only woman, right? You start to just be bringing value, and that starts to fade away.
Megan, anything quickly you'd like to add?
No, I just would emphasize, finding friends either in the boardroom or outside. It can be very lonely and isolating, especially as you're trying to help, work within to change the board composition. So don't try to do it alone.
So Megan, please continue. Talk to us about things to watch out for in the first year.
I would say, really looking at is the board conversations happening outside of the boardroom and not in the boardroom, and in, are decisions being made, kind of that board dysfunction, are people undermining leadership? Are they undermining other directors? What are the various aspects of board dysfunction? But also looking out for a weak board culture, a lack of trust between the management team and the board. The management doesn't want to ask for help because they find the board intimidating. Those are things that are really important to try to address right away. Because otherwise, not only will you not be able to have your second year on the board may end up having a massive turnover, or it won't be an environment where you want to stay.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Let's conclude and then we'll cover the question that was asked. So Anne, would you cover the first point here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we absolutely spent the good bulk of our time on how important it is for onboarding, not just for the first year, but ongoing, and that you could use your onboarding as a way to bring initial value as well by introducing what should good onboarding look like. So let your voice be heard here as you're doing it to really bring value right out of the gates to the board that you're joining.
Thank you. Deb, please take the second point.
Yeah, be ready to contribute from day one, be as prepared as you can, be up to speed as you can. Specific technique, when you get that board agenda, whatever you need to do in terms of research, whatever, have 2 comments, questions, or observations for every bullet on that agenda. So that way, you've got something to throw into the conversation before you even get into the boardroom.
Megan, please cover the last point.
I would just say, really make sure that you're aware of what a good board culture is, and make sure you are not part of the problem. Really focus on being an effective board member and, building that trust and honesty.
Thank you. We did get a question posted asking for suggestions for approaching the chair about enhancing governance. And they've seen situations where that chair might become defensive or say, well, this is how we've always done it. So Deb, why don't you take the first shot at answering that? Please be brief.
Yeah, I would lean into what I was saying in an earlier slide. No one can ever refute your observation or your experience. So I would lean into, if it's person's name is Joe, hey, Joe, just, one of my early board meetings, but I'm sort of observing this, and maybe it's me, I use a lot of couching language, but to get to my point, and you may have to take a couple of runs at that. You may also want to, connect with another board member who you trust, who you've built a relationship with from those dinners and that drink at the bar afterwards to say, hey, what do you think about that? I observed this. Is this the way it always is? Or just, I think you've got to push it, but you got to do it in a smart way.
Mm-hmm.
Megan, would you like to add anything briefly?
Yes, I would just, if there is a nominating governance committee, that is actually probably where I would start having that conversation, especially if the board chair is not open or welcome, because the nominating governance committee really is in charge of really good governance oversight. So if there is a way of kind of going about it the roundabout way, I think that's the way to do it. But otherwise, if there's not, really probably in both cases, I would approach those individuals with, as Deb suggested, I think it's a great strategy, and I'm going to use that.
Yeah. I would just add that you can also add, this is best practices. I've seen it on my other boards, or, if you do get to go to a board college, you can say, here's some of the latest best practices that people are implementing. That's another of, in my experience, that you can really raise the bar.
Thank you. We're close to concluding. We've listed some helpful materials here. If anyone would like to read up further on this, I'm not sure we have time for any more questions. I'll let Sheila handle that. I'll just add that nothing today should be taken as legal advice, even though some of the people on the call are lawyers. If you have a specific problem, please let us know. We'll try to get you to someone who can give you a good answer. And with that, I will turn it back to Sheila.
Well, thank you, Howard. You did such a great job of just getting that all done in an hour. So good job. And listen, oh my gosh, you guys, great information. Obviously, I didn't chime in and I would have, but you guys covered it all plus more. Deb, I love the whole thing of look at the pictures on the wall, like that honest, there was so many great nuggets in what everybody had to say. So thank you all so much. I would certainly take questions if there was any that came in. But again, I think you guys really nailed it, and I really, really, truly appreciate it. So, and I know our attendees are very thankful as well. So great job, and hope to talk with all of you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.